Assalamu alaikum. This is Professor Aminah Al for Critical Talk. We are going to have a very informative program this afternoon with attorney Abdullah Mitchell, with Tauqeef Muhammad, and with Imam Tariq El-Amin. Our topic is how are we doing? Uh, this is a production of Sound Vision Network, Muslim Network TV, and I hope all of you are tuned in because it's one of the few places where we can have honest and critical, I don't know if that those go together, conversations. Listening to Muslim Network TV news this afternoon, we have been focused on Gaza. But the Muslim world is in trouble. We're in trouble here in the United States, at our jobs, college campuses, in ordinary workspaces, and in a number of places I can't even think of, probably at the gym, walking down the street. How are we as Muslims who have a mandate to stand for justice in all the ways that we can, or however it is that we're able to combat one issue I want to talk about, especially this evening, which is the issue of freedom of expression. Can I have my panelists on? Um, this is Attorney Mitchell, Imam Tariq El-Amin, and Attorney and Chaplain Tauqeef Muhammad, who are going to join me. And I'm not going to give your credentials in case somebody is hunting you down. Um, Maybe I'll do that in the second half. Come to think of it, after you know, get in there good. And if they're going to hunt you, they're already on your case. Um, Freedom of expression in our everyday thinking, my thinking, I'm neither an attorney or a chaplain, is, that good old, very common, very simple, simplistic American understanding of, well, I can say anything I want to say. I want, well, sometimes I do want to be offensive. It depends on what the situation is, but I can't incite. I can't incite people to violence or to untoward acts. And if you ask me as a regular citizen, anything beyond that, I say, well, you got to say what you mean, and you're supposed to be able to have an opinion. But in today, in our organizations, as chaplains, as leaders of masajid, we're not too sure. So I want to open the discussion with Chaplain Tassif, who's looking all presidential over there in the corner, with what about freedom of expression? Assalamu alaikum. And
Assalamu
welcome
alaikum.
to Critical Talk.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to Dr. McLeod and Muslim Network TV for putting this together and esteemed panelists. I am not an attorney. I would just say that
Really?
I am not. I used to work at CARE Chicago as a researcher, but
That's
I did.
close.
I was close. I did do a year of law school and realized it wasn't for me at that time. So, that's a whole different story. But
Uh-huh.
what about this concept of freedom of speech? It's a good one. I was taught, through the Paideia program at Joyce Kilmer Elementary School, where I went, kind of the same simplistic notion as you framed it, um, that we have the right, and we should take advantage of that right to be, it's part of our citizenship. This is what we were being taught, fourth, fifth grade in these programs. And it seemed like a natural, we're in the schoolyard, we're talking about all sorts of things about where we come from, and people are insulting you and, making jokes. And so all of this was part of the milieu. And then you go to the madrasa and you learn Quran as we did, and it's a different atmosphere. It's a different environment. It's an environment of you're sitting in front of the Molvi, and while we didn't understand what we were reading, we're just kids. We're just learning how to read the Quran. But that idea of freedom of expression was not there. You were not encouraged by any means or any stretch of the imagination to question or challenge or anything. That was not the place or the time. So I start there just because it kind of gives you, or the audience as well, kind of an understanding of where I'm coming from, in my early years. But, as you grow, as you mature, you want to get involved in all sorts of the topics of the day, everything that concerns humankind, right? You have an opinion on, and you're forming these opinions, right? And I think a good question to be added on to this question of freedom of expression is how much of what we think we are freely expressing are really thought out ideas or statements rather than, kind of things we're taking up from the society and the culture, and things that maybe we've not thought out completely, that are, that are kind of subliminal into our subconscious from advertising and so forth and so on. And so it's kind of a general answer to the question, but from my understanding of Quran and my studies of Quran and Sunnah, it's fundamental. Islam could not have grown if it was not in an environment in which preaching, even though it was contested and there was oppression, where there was some semblance of you can exchange these ideas. So I think that's another thing I'll throw out on the table.
So I think this is an excellent starting point, because in my pursuing Islamic studies, I went to the madrasa. And after I got over the fact that they didn't have beds and some other things, which I hurried to supply because I was not sleeping on concrete. But I found that not only is critique discouraged, and thought is discouraged. You're not supposed to think, you're supposed to memorize, you know. And in pursuing an ijaza, one of the things that my teacher and I um, constantly were at loggerheads by, and I'm saying, well, where did he get this? And he's looking at me like, how dare you question the authority? And I'm saying, because I'm an older person by that time, and it becomes authority for you may not be an authority for me, you know. And if I don't ask you, then how am I going to know how valid my information is? And we didn't, but I learned because I wanted to finish and get out. But it became a thing of, but we're Muslim. How can we not develop educational practices of thought and critical thinking? But I have seen Imam Tariq nodding his head. So, and this is a conversation, guys. Feel free to jump in, out, or sideways at any time. Go ahead, Tariq.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aldean. First of all, for the opportunity to participate in the conversation, for the platform, and this question. I want to, I guess, connect to what you've mentioned, what my brother Tauqeef has mentioned as well, and this idea of the distinctions that we make between our our lives as Americans, right, in the secular sense, and our practice of engaging in this idea of freedom of speech, and then how that correlates or sometimes does not necessarily it does not mesh with our practice as Muslims, and often that's because of the idea that speech has to be it has to have a stamp of approval on it, right? As if to say you have to have like you said, they have to have this ijaza, you have to have studied with so and so, you have to have a stamp of approval on you before you have the ability to speak. And that's really contradictory, considering that from the human sense of it, right? And we understand Islam to be, Allah tells us that Islam is that this is a religion which is most suitable, right, for the human being, for the human sensitivities and tendencies. When you think about the Arabic language, and not to just to say how poetry was such a huge part of the language, right? It was such a huge part of the culture, and that it carried the sensitivities. It carried not just answers, but questions, much like poetry found in any other language, right? It carries the sensitivities. It carries the issues that people are dealing with. It carries the things that they feel strongly about. It poses the questions for society. And from that lens, I think that that is what the Quran found. In the context of its revelation, it found the people already in the modes, in the practice of expression, right? Just as with any other people. So I think when we divorce ourselves from that beginning, we strip ourselves of our humanity. And the last thing I would just kind of throw in from my own context, as the son of a playwright and a drama coach and teacher, we learned.
Where you get all your drama from?
Oh yeah. we learned the words of Paul Laurence Dunbar and Langston Hughes and other and Gwendolyn Brooks and Sojourner Truth. We learned these different words. They were not our words, but we learned them, and we learned to present them, to interpret them. It was, in essence, a way to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And I think when we take away the ability to share our experiences and our insights, we do ourselves a grave disservice. And of course, that's not just something we find in Islam, but again, that's a part, I believe, it's emblematic of the human condition that we want to express, we want to share.
I'm seeing the authorities sitting up there on freedom of expression and codes of conduct. Attorney Mitchell, and it's very interesting because in the history of this country, of course, we have had some freer than others to express themselves, and then some freer than others to talk about what is the truth of the times. And we've seen waves of banning against this, that, and the other when people do what they do best, or because of the color of their skin, or because of their religious seating. So it kind of baffles us when we look at today being forced with, oh my God, I can't say anything about anything. And if I utter the names of certain things, then I'm this, I'm that, and I might lose my job, and etc. So let's give us some how to understand freedom of expression, freedom of speech.
Who's jumping up? I don't want to. Huh?
Well, you
No,
know, first,
Attorney
Assalamu alaikum,
Mitchell was
everybody.
digesting.
Get to
Okay, good.
Go on, Attorney
All
Mitchell.
right. Well, when we speak, well, thank you, Dr. Aldine. First, I would like to say when we focus on freedom of speech, yes, it's a principle. It's rooted in our religious belief. It's also rooted in the founding document for this country, okay, and embedded in our Constitution. And I think the first thing that needs to be understood is let's draw a line between the ability to speak or voice one's opinion versus maybe that pushback that one encounters when one expresses their opinion. We see in the news how the news media has to date with the assistance of those who contribute information to them, have painted a narrative where any action taken by the nation of Israel is an act of defense. Whereas across the world, foreign governments, other social groups, labor unions are recognizing this action in Gaza for what it really is, and that's genocide. There is no respect for innocent civilian lives, and the call now for ceasefire is being viewed as even being I've been witnesses where you're being anti-Semitic because you're taking away our right to self-defend. That's the argument that is put there. We also go now that people who speak out in favor of Palestine and the Palestinians are now feeling the chilling effects of those expressions in terms of losing job appointments. Now being there to say free Palestine is now an incitement to riot. How our narrative, our speech is being twisted to the ends of to the point where it's now being muffled because the chilling effect says, can I even say this? And what I want to say to your audience is this isn't a question about the lack of freedom of expression. You can continue to freely express yourself. The question is the repercussions that one receives. How does that fit one in a legal framework, and how does that fit within let's say a social in the context of our society and the let's say the social implications that would come from making such statements. Particularly, like we said, once again, focusing in on the employers. I know that's one hot issue that we're hearing a lot about, people losing their jobs. And at least here in the state of Illinois, the employers are in the private sector. A lot of our rights are grounded to protect the individual citizen from the government's overreach. It doesn't apply just ipso facto to in the private sector. So, I mean, in Illinois, we do have a Right to Privacy Act here that permits, that bars employers from, demanding access to your social media accounts. But the question comes, once you make a statement, is that statement you make, does that is it injurious to the private company's interest? And we're finding that that is being challenged, and people are losing it based on that. I mean, those are the consequences of free speech. I mean, you can express yourself. The question then is, how do we deal with the chilling effect? How do we push back against this characterization that to say free Palestine is either anti-Semitic or is in any way derogative or injurious of a particular private company's livelihood or violating its business practices. The only thing I can say in that particular area is to the extent that there's disparate treatment Here, someone could say something about Israel and nothing happens. You say something about Palestine, that may be a legal basis for challenging it. But I think the real, and I'm wrapping with this, I think the real challenge for us as a Muslim community is how do we begin to change the narrative? How do we begin to repeatedly bring out the message of what is actually happening in Gaza?
Well, I'm going to stop you there because that's going to be the question for our next segment. We're going to take a break. Please get something to drink. And because we've got to figure out, I see what you got, how to change not only the narrative, but as you mentioned, many of us have been trained in a certain way where we don't have the tools to change a narrative. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to think about those two things and take a couple of minutes. And this is Professor Aminah Al-Din. We will be back on Critical Talk to talk more about how are we doing. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. This is Professor Aminah Al-Din, and we are back in what I think is an exceptionally informative conversation about our community and our role as Muslims during this time. I would like to bring back my co conspirators, uh, Chaplain Tauqeef Muhammad, Imam Tariq El-Amin, and Attorney Mitchell. You left us, well, let me say this first before I go back. In our communities, one of the things we have not evinced is freedom of expression. We don't have a situation where in the community, if we spot something untoward, if we see something that is an injustice, we can speak about it because we have fear. Oh, well, what is the community going to say about me? Or am I going to get, even though we don't have excommunication, well, we have our own form of it, uh, put out of the community? People who speak against injustice, like women, and I'll come back to that at another point, have very little parts of the stage to stand on. So, how are we going to come up with the tools to think about? It's not a rethink, it's a think about how to begin to form another narrative. We need to have people in place, and you joining me this evening are some of them who have, interestingly, not taken the time, and I'm going to harass all three of you, to write. We don't have responses to egregious things. And one of the most egregious is Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib made a statement in support of Palestine. She was immediately censored. The Congresswoman from the GOP in Florida said, kill them all. And she was given a handshake. These egregious, in our face assaults on freedom of expression, I don't know, speaking the truth as you see it, there's little debate. And in the Muslim community, we don't debate. We talk about what is right and what is wrong according to somebody who was deceased, I don't know, 900 years ago. But we don't have forums for debate of issues. How are we first to assess what is going on in Palestine? We can get a list of the wars, of the results of those wars, the negotiations and the deals that were made, but have we stepped back to assess that beyond our emotional thrust of the Palestinians got screwed?
Mm.
Because they were at the table. So, how do we first begin to assess what has been going on? It didn't happen in October, and we all know that.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we assess what has gone on? I've heard things like Israel is an apartheid state. Well, it has the markings, certainly, right? But how are we assess? I mean, that's a nice cliche, but what does it really mean?
Dr. Aldine, you threw about 8 or 9 different points in there.
Well, that's good. I've been teaching for years.
and all of them extremely weighty observations and questions that we have to grapple with. I want to pull out one. When we think about this concept of changing the narrative and what's required, and you alluded to it. Matter of fact, we are in this platform itself is a representation of the kind of response that is necessary, right? To first of all, to understand that we're not dealing with personalities, right? It's not an individual influence that we have to contend with. We're dealing with institutional frameworks. We're dealing with structures. We're dealing with systems that are in place that follow the norms of effective communication, right? Your communication must be directed, must be disciplined. It has to carry a particular message and not waver from that. So when we think that we're actually fighting back by putting out a Facebook post, right? Right, and I could raise my hand and say I've done that plenty of times.
Yeah, I read them.
That's and and that's really more for us as the individual. It doesn't carry the same type of weight that that multimedia, right? That these different news organizations carry, and that's why I say this platform, right? Having a having Muslim Network TV, right? That in itself, it is a response. It is disciplined communication. It is consistent, and it is giving voice to narratives and ideas, expressions that we see are visibly absent in other spaces. If anybody looks at the latest cover of the Muslim Journal, they see quite clearly. I wish I had it in front of me right now. It's speaking about what is going on in Gaza right now. And that's different. That's not the same, as I say, is that these individual responses that we give. So that's one of the things I want to lift up, is the need for disciplined communication. You talked about writing.
You know, I think that you're absolutely right. And I don't know how closely you follow, but we're running around like sheep. First, we were looking at all of the things happening in India and Pakistan. Then the sheep, the bell was rung, and then we ran over to Gaza. And then today another bell was rung, and we run to the Sudan. We are not only not keeping up, we're not coming out of the weeds to not and feeling like we must remember every aspect of a larger set of strategies.
Mm.
Don't you think so, Tauqeef? We're not supposed to be uh, played like this. There it is.
Wow.
I'm going to send you all this recording and put it on as many pieces of social media as I can. And I'm also going to invite you all back to enter into another larger conversation next Monday night about strategies that are happening from the U.S. point of view. Tauqeef.
We are in a very reactive moment. That's, shows like this, kind of mediums such as this are proactive. They're an example of proactive, consistent engagement. But I dare say that where our community is at, there seems to be another cultural issue in the sense of there isn't an intellectual engagement. Just like the rest of the American populace, we're being fed and we are accepting the feeding of entertainment and distraction. And the seriousness with which our community needs to have this disciplined approach, it's lacking. And I don't say this only to complain. Like, it is part of the analysis when we do strategize. We have our people like, other chaplains working on the university, hospital levels. We're in the front lines of a certain type of thing. Then we have our civil rights organizations and groups, who are overwhelmed. Whenever I talk about how are you doing with some of the leaders, I'm overwhelmed. We're stretched for resources. We're not getting the support that we need, or, and I'm not trying to make a lachrymose kind of paint a lachrymose kind of picture of everything, because I do also want to highlight like where the things are working in the right way. How do we amplify that, scale that up, support that? So these are some of the things percolating in my mind through the conversation.
Well, you all.
If I could just, sorry. Go ahead, Dr.
Go ahead.
I was just going to bring it to the experience here on the university campus. So I know from my colleagues at other universities, it's much more difficult for them in the sense that University of Chicago, as a specific case, it has this allegiance to what it calls the Chicago Principles, which was a 2014 committee that was put together particularly to kind of address like what are the values of the university, what is the the tradition of freedom of speech here. And that essentially boils down to, there was also this experience with the Calvin report in 1967, which came out of agitation, student activism, and organizing on campus to disinvest from South Africa's apartheid at that time. And so the position the college took then was, we house the critics, but the institution itself is not the critic. And so this developed into the Chicago principles, and there hasn't been the backlash against faculty to say they should be fired, they should be railroaded out or denied tenure. But that also hides another fact. This doesn't necessarily reach every student, because you alluded to earlier that not everyone has the same access to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. If you're a marginalized or minority community within a minority community, for example, and you're in a school or division or department of the university in which you may be one or two or three people, and that department is like, let's say, just put it out transparently and bluntly, pro-Israel, has a lot of backing from pro-Israel voices, you're going to self-censor. Right. And so self-censorship is a big, and so this dialogue, this debate's been occurring in the community about, do we wait until we get in positions of power? We kind of keep our head down as students and then wait, or do we kind of agitate now, organize now, because who knows what will happen to us? We may die tomorrow, right? Who knows when we get into those positions of power, the expectations may be even greater. The obstacles may be even greater in terms of, now there's other kinds of things involved. So these are kind of some of the debates happening here, I could say, just like on a micro level, that I think do speak to our community overall and broad level as well.
Let me, since Attorney Mitchell threw it out there, jump on it.
Well, once again, if we're talking about what are the tools, we don't have to look far. It's basic community organizing. We've witnessed it with Black Lives Matters. We've witnessed it with Arab Springs. It is, how do we cultivate a grassroots swell of grassroots support for I would say is the true narrative of what's happening in Gaza. Well, part of that is that people are not informed, and they're being informed of other stories. And basically, the first one who gets out there with a story, sometimes that's taken to be the truth. And that is probably, from one side, look at, that's our fault for failing to bring truth to light. But that doesn't excuse us from the responsibility of doing that. And the other aspects of it is, yes, this could have a chilling effect on your lifestyle. It may affect your employment, but that's not very different from, let's say, very other civil rights struggles. It's not easy. We want to have our cake and eat it too. At some point, we have to make a decision. Are we going to stand now? Because if we fail, it's going to be worse for our children and our grandchildren. If you can get away with the killing of over 10,000 people, all under the banner of right to self-defense, 99.9% of them have no weapons, then what's next? And it doesn't mean, and here we're seeing it here in the United States, where you're trying to carry the call Free Palestine, and now next thing you're being taunted, you're being receiving hate mail, you're, like I said, you're feeling the effects. and that comes from our failure to speak up, as you says, Tarek, I did put down direct, straight, and consistent messaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fundamentally, that I think that's another aspect that we have to address is looking for the leadership to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. All right. I think as a community, we have not confronted this in the United States before. I'm hopeful that we will address the. I will address the. Well, yeah, that I'll correct my statement based on what you're taking me, but nonetheless, this forces can be. I'm restated, rejuvenated to begin to address the situations that we're facing now. All right.
But it's very interesting that when I was a little bit younger, and we decided that if you're going to kill me because I'm black, right? And you're going to kill me. I was just learning about what was Mao's Revolution. I couldn't read the little book, but and all of these things. And we began as young people to make commitments, that we were willing to die for. And when kids asked us about how come you don't have these huge retirement accounts, well, we didn't think we were going to live that long to either have kids or grandkids to be saving for. I remember when the issues about apartheid came to college campuses, and many of us went to jail to talk about the oppression of people. And many of us were Muslim. We're saying, I mean, I was so big and pregnant, they couldn't figure out how to put handcuffs on, and I was saying, hey, I'll go willingly, now we're so darn cerebral that it has to be stepping on our individual toes for us to get our acts together. 9/11 came, and I'm saying, oh, this is interesting. You know, thousands of emails and calls about all of the wonderful things people were going to do. But after some past experiences, I could very easily say, kiss my wrist. You're not going to stop me from doing and saying what I got to say. But now, because the Quran says, cool. And whatever the opposite of cool is, that's what we say. Well, let me think about it. What is it going to cost me? And is what we think is going to cost us worse than dead? It's very, very interesting that the three of you sitting here, and when I call you back, and if you don't answer my calls, I know where each of you live. I will be there. And because we've got to strategize beyond the day-to-day events. There's a larger strategy at play here. They're not doing what they're doing in India and Pakistan, and we've continued seating ourselves in the Middle East, right? Because we already have bases there, and we're expanding them. It's not going to stop at the West Bank because we've armed the settlers more so as of last week. We're going to go and, arm them more against Lebanon and Syria. And we can say anything to an American. Oh, well, they were flying drones, so we had to bomb Syria and we had to rebomb Iraq and we had to do the, and we're not dedicating a portion of our day. The Hindus have lost their mind in India. Why? Because we're focused on Gaza.
Yeah.
Go
And you
ahead.
know what? I'm sorry. I think so. Again, how I'm situated. When I think about the experience of African Americans and Black folks here in the United States, I have to recognize that it is not just a matter of freedom of expression. It is also what is the logical conclusion? What is the result of those words, those ideas that are expressed? It is going to lead to a realization. It's going to lead to an investigation, to an accounting of our past that has brought us to the present. So when we think about Israel's justification for their for what is a genocide right now under the guise of right to self-defense, and that's being brought out, for those of us here, that takes us back to American expansion, to manifest destiny. That takes us back to the wholesale killing of millions of indigenous, of Native Americans. It takes us back to the transatlantic slave trade. It takes us back, even moving forward, it takes us back to eminent domain and the hundreds, if not thousands, of African American cities and towns and enclaves that have been taken over, that have been erased from the landscape or buried. You know, a lot of them under lakes. Central Park is one of them that you can go to right now that used to be right. You can go through the city now and see spaces that have been, you know, where the highways now divide the public. All of these things to say that the danger is that we are pushing back against an entrenched psychology and a way of a manner of being that any type of expression that is against what is happening there would lead people back to fully recognize and maybe to investigate what they see wrong, the wrong that is being done here. So I think it's critically important that we understand that it's not an a la carte thing. It's not just because it's happening to me that is important, but that this is something that is emblematic of oppression that is going on all over the world. And if it is not challenged now in this space, it becomes that much easier for it to continue in places like the Congo, like in Sudan, like in India, you know, in Kashmir, right? So in so many, and right here as well.
How, you know, I listen to the khutbah at your masjid. I listen every Frederick, and I listen every Friday, and I listen at the Nation's Masjid in Washington D.C. And I listen to the Society of what is it? The Society of Islamic Society of Baltimore, because I'm listening around to hear what I hear. But you haven't changed. The imams are giving impassioned speeches. But why don't you change? If today is a day of reckoning, why doesn't the football look different? Why doesn't it become a discussion session where we hear what the people have to say? This includes you, Tauqeef. You know, hear what these young people have to say. What's on people's minds? What don't they understand? How can invite Mitchell over to the University of Chicago during
Would
June?
love to have.
Now,
I mean, Imam Tariq is up this Friday.
huh?
I don't know. Imam Tariq El-Amin is up this Friday at U Chicago.
Yeah. Well, have him bring Mitchell with him. Make it.
There you go.
I'm just saying,
Let's go.
sometimes structures need to change
Mm.
to encompass what it is. You know, I mean, Allah is not going to reach down and help our tired selves if we don't recognize the urgency in which we live and move to change it. Every khutbah does not have to have, well, it should have, but it doesn't have to have two parts unless those two parts are intertwined with how am I going to do what I am obligated to do By faith. And then how am I going to assist my community in understanding? Because he's right. I mean, folks sitting out there, they don't know what to make of it. I'm listening to, well, I have Jewish friends and they're against it. It's not about all Jews, it's about a struggle. Is the struggle to eliminate you? I'm making Attorney Mitchell nervous up there.
Well, I mean, you're asking some very poignant questions, and really, we should all feel heat right now because our failure to act is going to cause consequences for those that follow us. This is not something like a TV show that's going to be solved in 30 minutes to an hour. It's going to require a full commitment. You think the civil rights, you say, oh, the civil rights movement's over, everything. We've learned, we know that it is not over. Notwithstanding what the media and those that have access to the media want to tell us, racism is still alive and well and thriving in America. Okay. The subjugation and marginalization of people, we see it across the globe. So what the real question is what are we going to do? What can we do? And are we willing to step up, as you say, not just give an impassionate khutbah on Friday to get us fired up. And just like I analogize it to a match, we light a match, but the match burns out, shortly after the khutbah is over. And then if we don't feed the message that the imams give us to move forward, then then we're reducing the khutbahs to just as one preacher used to tell me, he used to call it religious entertainment. We don't need religious entertainment. We need action at this point.
Well, I think that I'm going to challenge all of you. Join me. I mean, Malik Mujahid for Sound Vision has stuck foot, neck, and head out to make it possible for us to have conversations like this. He's not backed up. And I told him I was going for it, and he said, okay, I'm going to go for it. But I don't want to go for nothing. I'm going to challenge you. We don't have to write tiny things. We can write, and Abdullah, and I think Tariq might have been in there. I got one of my friends who's a senior editor at The Guardian to work with us on writing op-ed pieces. She's more than willing to do it again. If we want to write op-ed pieces that get published, after we critically think about something, come together, huddle, work it out, we can do that. But I think there is a need for a narrative that doesn't get in the weeds of give me another word for BS. For
well, let me add what it is we cannot get caught in the political jargon. We have to go. We have to address the fundamental that we coined it, the sanctity of life. The reason I will, as the head of the Council of Islamic Organizations, as the executive director, go out and march in the Palestinian rally, march with Kashmiri Muslims in Lombard or whatever, go up to Devon in terms of the Rohingya, is not because I'm Palestinian, I'm Indian, or from Burma. My situation is that we have to unite on the universality of the sacredness of life for all mankind. That's what is going to bring us our allies. It's not trying to convince, oh, that you should support this one group of people over that one group of people.
Right.
The message is clear in Gaza. This is a affront to the whole principle of a sanctity of life. Under Geneva Convention, protocols have been violated by the nation of Israel, and we, as God-fearing people, should be speaking out against this. So this should cross religious lines. This should cross ethnic, racial lines, so that we have, as human beings, one voice that speak as one voice.
Oh, I agree. And please, we have a few more minutes, and I've extended our time a few more minutes because you all are all hot. Please speak.
And can I want to add on that too, because I think all of our hearts are with Gaza and Palestine, and as eloquently stated, by Attorney Mitchell, it's almost like an exceptional urgency. But I think if we're being critical, and this is a safe place to be critical, as the name of the program is Critical Talk, one thing I wonder about is so I worked for a number of years on the Rohingya issue, right? One of many, right? And it was like pulling teeth to get people to show up to World Rohingya Day and these other things. And I talked to a few people, young people, right, because there were some people in our community who, when they saw October 7th, I saw something in their eye, right? Like, and not to go too deep into that, but when Attorney Mitchell, you say that sacredness of life, it's like we have yet to imbibe that as a community and fulfill that right to that, I think, because when certain of these, we don't know what happened in Sudan, right? Or when people respond to that, like we have to have a very clear and principled and courageous way where we talk about any innocent life. Like this is just ma'lum, this is just known from the religion, like anyone who is innocent, but it doesn't play out that way.
But let me ask you this. When we're talking about criticality, I know children who carry rifles and will kill you. I know women who carry bombs and will kill you. Are we redefining how we understand? We know that we have tenets with regard to war, right? But now have they shifted somehow, and we must include them in our thinking about what we offer as assessments with regard to critical thinking, right? I mean,
That's a great question.
Does Hamas actually have built tunnels under every darn thing? It looks like they got a whole city down there, according to the Israelis. But I mean, when you begin to bomb hospitals, where I looked this afternoon at the neonatal unit, I don't think they got bombs.
No,
absolutely.
And I think a part of being critical, a big part of it is to investigate the context of violence, right? And when Hamas is mentioned, we know that the violence, Israel's violence towards Palestinians, predates the creation of Hamas, right? We understand that. We know what the Nakba is. We know that violence has been perpetrated for decades and decades and decades. When we strip away context, then the interpretation is flawed. Just imagine if social media was around during the time of Nat Turner, or around during the time of, there were at least 250 enslaved revolts, right? At least during that time. Imagine what the news coverage of those revolts would look like. They would look very much lack any type of context or nuance, and say that these are simply savages who decided to attack the people, these nice people who were sleeping in their homes. Make no mention of the fact that they had endured every type of violence and indignity. So I think for us, it's important to be a people that introduces the context, understands the context, that abhors violence, but understands the context of it. And at least in that allows us to have a better appreciation of what we're looking at. And the last thing I want to mention is this. It's also important for us to recognize that leaders often find themselves following or trying to catch up to the people. And in that, we have to understand that our leadership, we have to have a much more expanded view of what it means to be a leader in this particular time. We have a contribution towards leadership, but we do not have a monopoly on leadership. And I think that's extremely important in these times right now, because the voices that are needed, the talents and resources that are needed far outweigh any individual's ability to represent that. And I think that's extremely important. So we got to think team, internally as well as externally.
No, I mean, I think Imam Tariq, that last point really sums it up well. This is not an individual journey. This is a collective journey, and I think Professor Aldine has called us to that. How can we, begin to build a strategy? I mean, clearly the best place to start in Tauqeef is in the schools, because young people, they're usually those who will get out in the street, like you're saying. And I think part of the problem, when you made reference, why are so people unengaged? I think that we really do not appreciate what is happening. I mean, we're in a society that glorifies violence. Whether in the entertainment is we're starting to become numb to tragedies because we see it so regularly that it's almost like we don't feel it. I mean, it takes some horrific kind of thing to even kind of wake us up. So I think the challenge for us is how do we continue to educate our community, bringing as much context as Imam Tariq is mentioning, and help to build a platform. Because if we don't have people that believe in the cause, there ain't nobody be walking the streets. Okay, so I think it is how we can begin to start that process. Because as you're saying, Tariq, standing alone, it's beyond the shoulder, the capacity of any individual to carry this. It's a community responsibility, and we call on the members of your audience to help join in this struggle to protect the sanctity of life in the world.
I mean,
I think you're muted, Dr. Adine.
This conversation is not going to stop here. I'm going to ask each of you in a phone conversation or a Zoom meeting this weekend to meet with me again, because I'm not willing to let it go. I want to thank each of you. May Allah be pleased with our conversation, and to thank Sound Vision, with producers, Critical Talk, for enabling us to begin.
Amen.
I
Amen.
I'm going to ask our seasoned attorney Mitchell to stay on. This is Professor Aminah Al-Din for Critical Talk, which is a production of Sound Vision TV. And Tariq, I will talk with you later on tomorrow.
Inshallah. All right.
Assalamu
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so
alaikum.
much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.